legalizefreedom.com. Why are we here? Where do we come from? Where are we going? From the nature of reality to the future of humanity. Listen without limits. Unchain your brain. Change your thinking. Change your life. legalizefreedom.com.
Greetings and welcome once again to legalizefreedom.com. I'm your host Greg Moffat, and my guest today is Courtney Brown of the Farsight Institute, who joins us to discuss new video techniques for capturing images of UFOs. Debate about the existence of extraterrestrial life has continued for decades. What is certain, however, is that sightings of unidentified objects, lights, and other phenomena in the sky, on the ground, and elsewhere also continue to occur, apparently with increasing frequency. Whether physical or non-material, or some combination of the two, these phenomena present a challenge to the orthodox view of reality. Despite much talk of disclosure, government and other agencies remain evasive on the subject. And, as with most other matters, officialdom simply cannot be trusted to tell the truth. Moving on then, if extraterrestrials do exist and are visiting Earth, the next logical questions are, what are they doing and what do they want? Hello and welcome, Courtney, and thank you so much for joining us once again on legalizefreedom.com.
Greg, it's my great pleasure. It's been a while since I've been on your podcast, so it's great to be here.
I think it's 6 years actually now. This represents a decade since you first came on back in 2013, but I think it's been 6 years since you've been a guest on the show. Now, we could talk about Farsight, this is your major project, and remote viewing itself, but we've done lots of interviews together in the past. Those will all be linked on the interview page for this one. And indeed, in my recorded introduction, I'll be mentioning what remote viewing basically is and what Farsight does. So maybe we should just, sort of cut to the chase, as it were. It's been a few years since you've been on. In the meantime, you've been working on developing your media platforms, but also more recently, your new project regarding UFO, UAP phenomena, capturing images of that. So yeah, I'll give the floor over to you and you just get us started however you'd like to.
Super. I can actually say we're the absolute largest venue of remote viewing studies, open public projects anywhere. I can say that categorically because we're the only venue where you can get public projects of remote viewing. It's the only place where you can actually go in and just see like what project after project after project. We've got like 75 major projects of remote viewing projects that we've done on every possible subject, from political, religious, archaeological, and a lot of extraterrestrial and UFO type stuff as well. So, and, when remote viewing as we do it is different from what other people do. Our remote viewers are trained for at least a year full time before they touch our projects. And, they're really the best there is. Remote viewing to do it well is really hard. And these people are the best there is. Those are perceptual processes that, it's originally developed by the United States military and to this day is still used. They officially closed down their original project, but you can be guaranteed they're not stupid. They still have operational remote viewing stuff going on, but it's a perceptual process that allows you to perceive across time and space. It works very well. And, we entered a new realm where we needed to be able to get to a larger audience. And in the day and age of censorship everywhere, it's just really very, very difficult. We started our own streaming service because we couldn't count on anything. I mean, YouTube, for example, they canceled a very mainstream news show called The Hill. It's a show rising from The Hill. And The Hill is a major news outlet, and a digital news outlet, in terms of text, digital text stuff. And I mean, lots of people get interviewed on it. It's really big. And they have a very great YouTube channel that now has 1.7 million subscribers, and lots of people watch it, and everybody tries to get on it. Well, they canceled them. Now they're back, but for a while they were canceled by YouTube simply because they showed a clip where Donald Trump was talking. No, this is a news show, so they had to show a clip where Donald Trump. They didn't say anything about them believing that the election of 2020 was fraudulent. They were just showing what Donald Trump said in part of a news show. So they're back, but you have to be very careful in today's day and age. So we realized we couldn't rely on any other venue to get our information out. So we have our own streaming service called farsightprime.com. So we don't worry about the censorship issue very much. And that we don't have any sexually explicit anything in our content. We have no violence on our content, and we don't have any political views on our content because we're nonpartisan. So we don't have any extreme political views. So you can sort of say, what is the shadow banning all about? And it's about the extraterrestrial content. It started the month that Congress required the military, U.S. military, to give information about the UAPs/UFOs to Congress. And that was June of 2021. That month is when the shadow banning started. So it's clearly related to the UFO, alien, extraterrestrial issue, which is very interesting. Anyway, but Google also censors a lot of things dealing with that. We did a Mars project, for example, about a base on Mars, and Haim Eshed, the former head of the Israeli Space Directorate for 30 years, has said there is an underground base on Mars where humans and extraterrestrials work side by side. Now, he's a general and now professor. And again, he was like their version of NASA, the head of the Israeli Space Directorate for 30 years. He has said that there are written agreements signed by the United States government and extraterrestrials to allow them to conduct what they call experiments and to operate here on Earth. And one of the requirements written in the agreements is that it be kept secret. So, but he has talked about there being an actual base on Mars. So the base on Mars issue is a really big deal. So that we have really high resolution images of the base. It's really great. I mean, they have domes, and they have a pipeline coming out of domes, and then you see a wastewater being sprayed out of the dome, out of the pipeline, out of a nozzle. It's really clear. And that same exact spot on Google Earth in their Mars option is censored. It's not like sort of a mistaken censor. It's real clear lines on top of that place so that you cannot see what's there. We always knew that at some point we'd have to do something that would prove to people that the extraterrestrials are real. Prove. And I mean prove in the sense of prove, like really prove. And that came about because there was an innovation in camera equipment that Panasonic released last year, 2022. They released the Panasonic GH6 cameras, and their GH6 cameras allow you to record in 4K at 120 frames a second, which is what you need to capture UFOs because they go so crazy fast. You need 120 frames a second. If you just shoot at 25 frames a second or 30 frames a second, all you see is a dot on the screen. But if you shoot at 120 frames a second, you can actually see them, and you can slow it down when you're editing the footage and so on. So that was a big deal for us. And so we also have to shoot in infrared. So we take our GH6s and we ship them out to a company called Life Pixel. They convert the camera to what they call a full spectrum camera that can see into the infrared as well as the ultraviolet. And then we fit it with a filter on top of the lens that allows us to dial in the exact band in infrared that we want to capture. And what's really clear is that the UFOs are trying to hide themselves. Just like Haim Eshed said with the agreements, you can clearly see that they're really trying to hide themselves because you can only see them if you do specialized stuff to evade their tech. They could easily become visible. They could turn off their equipment that makes them visible only in infrared, And they could also slow down, fly slower. So they clearly do not want you to see them. But we can see them now, clear as day. And we have done a huge number of recordings. It's now possible to record on demand. Typically, our recordings are about 10 minutes long, and in any 10-minute to 15-minute video recording, we often get 40 or 50 UFOs in the middle of the day, meaning they're everywhere. So if you were to go to London, downtown London, and set up one of the cameras and point it straight up and just shoot for 10, 15 minutes and then bring it into Adobe Premiere and just edit it, you'd see it as well. You'd see a whole bunch of them. You'd have trouble figuring out which ones you want to focus on.
Some of the footage that I watched in one of the videos you released, it reminded me a little bit of the first time that I looked at just simple tap water underneath a microscope, an electron microscope, is that you looked at the water on the slide just with the naked eye. It's just water, there's nothing there. And you look at it under the microscope and suddenly there's hundreds and thousands of things, objects just moving in all directions, doing crazy stuff. And anyway, that stuff,
yes,
those objects are always there. But part of the issue here was always to do with frequency spectrum. Like we know that even our pets, cats and dogs, can perceive wider frequencies and light and sound than humans can. So you talk about the new developments in camera equipment. Part of the issue was always about our instruments, our scientific instruments, and what they can add to our own senses. So just in perceiving what is already there.
Yeah, if you look at like bumblebees and goldfish, they can see in infrared and ultraviolet realms that we cannot see and that we're totally blind to. So whatever frequency you're looking at, you're opening up to new things. But the human eye is, and all of the cameras normally are restricted to see only what the human eye can see, because you don't want your picture in a camera to have a lot of infrared or ultraviolet stuff coming in, because that would produce a haze over your whole camera. So for normal picture taking, you don't want the infrared and the ultraviolet. So they have a piece of glass on the top of the sensor for all cameras that blocks out the infrared and ultraviolet. And then that's a good analogy you make, Greg, about looking at water and then seeing, well, there's nothing in this water, but you put it under a microscope and you see bugs all over the place. So that's.
Now, I understand the real difficulty with trying to convince people that UFOs, which after all, we're just talking about unidentified flying objects, are now the more fashionable UAP, unidentified aerial phenomenon, are actually some kind of off-world presence, off-world beings, off-world craft. There are some people who are already absolutely convinced, religiously convinced of this, but persuading other people, I do get the difficulty. And you're saying that, what you're attempting to do is just bring another level of that to the table and just say, okay, well, you've seen this, you're not convinced, try this. But obviously, lots of strange phenomena can be observed through cameras, through the naked eye, via all sorts of instruments at all levels, microscopic and macroscopic, on the Earth and off. But how do you feel that what you're doing with the new photography techniques or the expanded techniques is really changing the game, if you see what I mean? Because when I saw the footage, I see these objects moving, but again, it's still not something that I can put right in front of me and examine. It's still at a remove, if you see what I mean.
Yeah, but there's a difference here. We realize that the debunkers that say that any image that you see, they're going to find trouble with, they're like cockroaches. They're always there, and they always come out whenever you have any evidence of anything real. And so the debunking cockroaches are just going to be always popping out, and they're highly active, especially on places like Wikipedia and even YouTube. When you have a YouTube video that deals with one of the groups of extraterrestrials, like reptilians or another group, they put up something on the bottom of the video saying this is not real. So to evade or to defeat the debunkers, our strategy is not just to show you what we do with our cameras, but to show you how to repeat what we do with our cameras, how you do it yourself. So at our normal website, farsight.org, at the top of the menu, 4 links down at the top of the menu, there's a link called Recording UAPs/UFOs. We go through exactly the steps that we use, and then we give you examples, a lot of examples on a lot of our projects. You can see lots of examples of the UFOs that we have captured. Our goal here is to defeat the debunkers by getting other people to take their videos. So you can debunk anyone's video, but you can't debunk your own video. So, and that's starting. We're seeing a cottage industry of people that are actually starting to take their own videos.
Oh, yeah. And I mean, in the realm of ufology, I suppose that's always been the case. I mean, some of the most famous pieces of footage or photographic images, and testimony comes from just, ordinary people with no background, no scientific or any sort of research background. They've just encountered something, So, but I suppose that again prompts the question. I mean, looking at certainly some of the very startling footage that you have recorded and sort of shown other people how to record for themselves. There's certainly something real here. If we use an expanded definition of real, as in it doesn't necessarily have to be strictly all confined to 5 sense 3-dimensional reality in the same way it doesn't have to be confined to the frequency spectrum that humans can see and hear. So the question really is then, fine, these things are real, we're witnessing something here, but the question is then, what are they? I mean, that's the real nub of it, isn't it? We're seeing something, but what are we seeing? Is it a range of things? Is it the same type of phenomena?
Well, we have a huge range of different types of vehicles we're actually seeing. We have some information that gives us a little bit of an insight about this. First of all, we have our remote viewing projects, which are the best that you can get anywhere, and they go behind the scenes. You actually see what they are. We go into the ships, we describe what's going on, and so on. However, the images themselves, the photographic images themselves, actually the video images, are really clear. And the different configurations that we see are like, we have these orbs that are circular type of things. And then we have sort of cigar-shaped, cylindrical type of graphs. And then we have like rotating UFO saucer type of things that are spinning around. We have just a huge variety of different. And we also, at farsightprime.com, we have a show called Identified Flying Objects that's hosted by Intisam, and one of the main participants in that show is Lincoln Lounsbury. Lincoln Lounsbury is a flight traffic controller who worked for decades as a major flight traffic controller across the United States, including for many, many, many years, the Washington International Airport in Washington, D.C. And that's the most highly protected airspace on the planet. And he is the one who has been analyzing our footage and telling us the speeds of these UFOs. Because the speeds, you have to be technically astute in order to be able to figure out how fast they're going. Typically, these UFOs are going 20,000 miles an hour, or that's 32,000 kilometers per hour. Now, if you were to have a big UFO fly right over your house at 32,000 kilometers per hour, you would not see it. It would be totally invisible. It's just too fast. You just can't see it. But if you shoot it at 120 frames per second in infrared, you'll see it, and it's clear as day. And we have lots of footage that you can see on the Instagram, my Instagram page, for example, Courtney Brown Farsight, that you can actually see these things and also people always have their phones or with them. So if you're talking with somebody and you want to show somebody, what do you think about this? You just whip out your phone and just show them, and it starts a conversation. So these clips are just simply amazing. They travel so fast. We just assumed that they travel worldwide, all over the place equally. They can cross the United States in just a matter of seconds. So if you see them over Atlanta, but they're going 20,000 miles an hour, they can be over California just a few seconds later. My assumption was that you could get them equally anywhere. So I did an experiment this summer. I went out to Africa, Kenya, and I tried to do the exact same thing of photographing UFOs there with our same cameras and so on. and I did 5 photo shoot days, and I got only 1 UFO. So they're not equally present. They are really in great abundance over Washington, D.C. I mean, it's like Grand Central Station over Washington, D.C. I mean, you may think, that's really highly protected airspace, but from what? Once you take the cameras and you look at everything that's flying up there, you say, what are they protecting it from? These crafts go in and out at random, whenever they want. And over Atlanta, where I am, it's just like Washington, D.C. They're just everywhere, constant, all over the place, and big. You can really see them. And I'm positive over London, Greg, you'd get the exact same results. You'd get like tons of UFOs all over the place over London. But over Kenya, and I tried the coastal area around Malindi, and then I tried also Nairobi, right, very close to the Wilson Airport. And we got 1 UFO over Malindi. That's it. After 5 days of trying. Now, in the United States, over Atlanta, 1 attempt for 10 or 15 minutes will get typically 50 UFOs. I mean, they're all over the place.
Well, I've seen a few maps over the years correlating UFO activity. Whatever you take that to be, sightings or however it's monitored or collated. And always the hub of the activity has been North America, not evenly distributed over the whole country either. But when I say North America, I mean USA, less so in Canada, and then you have other hotspots in Europe, including the UK, and then you can see it gradually the hotspots getting a bit cooler as you go to other parts of the world. But there's certain parts of the world that are notably in the kind of green and blue zone, with very little activity. So that's always led whatever you think is going on with these phenomena to ask the question about, is it somehow again correlated with human activity? What's the relationship there?
Yeah, but this is a situation where you're not relying on UFO reports from people. This is a situation where you're sort of getting a survey with cameras that are pointed up in the sky in the same way. And it's literally like collecting a survey with a sample. And so it's scientific in that sense. And we are noticing a big difference. So if you say in terms of just UFO reports that people report, that's anecdotal. But if you actually are recording these things on video, then you have a very clear demonstration. It's not anecdotal. You have their actual footage. They're not over Africa. Actually, they're not over Kenya very much. However, I don't know about South Africa. So if you were to go to various big cities in South Africa, maybe they'd be there. You don't know until you know. You have to actually.
Yeah, but from what you were saying, though, the work that you have been doing with this photographic, techniques and the results thereof is that it's bearing out. It is correlating with earlier distribution patterns of activity, which suggests that aside from the relatively small number of like self-seeking kind of fantasists or mentally unstable people who are reporting these things, that actually a lot of the anecdotal evidence, past anecdotal evidence, has been genuine and honest.
No, that's exactly right. So, but what I was saying is the video recording stuff that we've been doing systematically is backing up. It is reflecting exactly what you just said. It is backing up the anecdotal reports of people saying UFO activities are more common in certain areas. And when you actually point the cameras up and get a sample of these things, that is in fact what's happening. There are hotspots.
It was also interesting what you said about the types of, use the word craft. We have to call these things something. Object is like, let's just go with object, craft, whatever term anyone's happy with. But you talked about types and subtypes of these that you've observed in your recent footage. That it's interesting that also correlates with past categories and subcategories of different types of shapes, movement patterns, ways that you could organize these things. That's kind of borne out as well.
Yeah, that's exactly right. The entire issue of what these things actually are really can only be understood from the perspective of the remote viewing stuff combined with the photographic stuff. And that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to not have people rely just on the remote viewing stuff, because they have to say, well, I don't know, is it real? But then when you combine the remote viewing stuff with the video recording stuff, and us describing exactly the way that we took the video so other people can replicate it, then it raises it to an entirely new level. So it's very interesting. For example, if you look at the UFO video recordings that the military has released, like the so-called Tic Tac, because the thing looks like a throat lozenge, that's really crappy, really fuzzy, and it's hard to see anything clear on it. And they make a big deal about it. Our videos are way better than those. I mean, like way better than those. And I see our followers on Instagram that are now doing it with their own cameras. They're getting way better images as well. The cat is basically out of the bag. Now we know that officialdom actually watches our stuff because they respond when we start doing stuff. A lot of this disclosure stuff really started to ramp up right after we started publishing not just the videos, but also, the techniques for how to replicate it, how to do your own videos. And that's when the congressional hearings started to crank up. The whistleblower stuff started to come out. Now the mainstream isn't yet reporting on what we do, but they're clearly responding to it. And then you have also disinformation people popping up all over the place. All major news outlets have some people from every single one. There's not any that don't. They have somebody on the major news outlet that has some type of connection to the U.S. intelligence services, at least in the United States. And that means that they can always rely on getting something out that the intelligence people want in order to direct people away from a subject that they don't want people to be talking about. And that includes UFO groups out there that think they're just a bunch of new agers that are doing great stuff. They have people that work for the intelligence community in there, and they don't even, the groups don't even know who they are. And for example, there was a major UFO conference that took place this summer, and somebody big got up and said, and don't look into the skies. Don't try. UFOs are so rare to find. Don't try to take your own. Just don't look to the sky. Don't try to get your own recordings of these things. Just follow what we publish. And that came out right after we started telling people how to make all the recordings of UFOs themselves. And we're encouraging people to look to the skies and set up the cameras a certain way and edit it a certain way. So, we get people responding to what we're doing, even if they don't talk about us by name.
Well, talking about disinformation agents, Dr. Stephen Greer, I've always just felt completely uneasy about what the information he's delivering, it, how, why, just everything about the guy, even his body language I don't like. And I'm normally a pretty good judge of people. And then the side of the pond, you've got Nick Pope, who to me is just everything that I don't know what he's involved in the past. We know what he says, but all of his pronouncements, it's just a whole lot of nothing, really.
With both of those people, you see them appearing on mainstream outlets, which tells you right away what's going on to those people. However, Stephen Greer is an interesting person because his bottom line, his story, is that all of the UFOs are real and they're all extraterrestrials and they're all good. That's what his line is, that everything is good. And the only thing that's bad is the human governments that are trying to squash everything. And if the governments would only free up the information, the planet could be free. Now that line, I know, Stephen, that line, I just don't, the thing is just so stupid. I don't know where to begin. There's no organization on anywhere. If you look at Earth, nowhere can you say that all people are good or all governments are good. What we clearly find with the UFO phenomena is that we've investigated it more than anybody else by far. And what we clearly find is that there are two basic categories of aliens. There are good ones and bad ones. The bad ones are fascist, and they are involved in huge levels of human trafficking, and they have written, signed agreements with the United States government and a few other governments. And that's something that Haim Eshed, former head of the Israeli Space Directorate for 30 years, has stated publicly. So the bad ETs are doing lots of things that people would not agree with and not want them to do. In addition to that, you have academics such as David M. Jacobs and John Mack, the late John Mack, who have published books about the so-called abduction phenomenon. And now, the people who just say the ETs are all good, everything's fine, the problems are just humans, they're like not watching, they're not reading, they're not tuned into everything. So it's not just our remote viewing studies. David M. Jacobs and John Mack, they've interviewed lots of people. David M. Jacobs has actually interviewed probably the most, and they have detailed what actually people say happens to them when they get abducted. And some of these things are done under hypnosis, but it's actually easy. It's actually possible to break the hypnosis. When people get abducted, they're given a hypnotic suggestion to forget. It's possible to break that suggestion, so people become resistant to it. So they remember it after it happens. And then David M. Jacobs has interviewed zillions of people who clearly described the ETs doing terrible things, and they're not good. And he has claimed that that it's actually a process of planetary acquisition. He doesn't understand the entire picture, though, because I don't have any problems with his data and his methods, but he only looks at the abduction people. So he doesn't look at the non-abduction ETs. So we have found that the other group of ETs, the good ETs, who are actually opposed to the bad ETs, and the bad ETs are dominant on the planet Earth. They're the ones that have written agreements with the United States government and some other governments. And if you're a student and you know anything about this field and people like Haim Eshed and other things, that's not really in dispute. But the good ETs are dominant in the solar system, meaning there's more of them militarily and strength-wise in the solar system, and they want to free the planet, essentially. But the bad ETs are dominant on the planet Earth. The trouble is that the good ETs cannot invade and kick out the bad ETs, because the human population would be thinking of the good ETs as invaders and ask the governments to protect themselves. It's like saying you think that the people of Russia are not being satisfactorily guided by their governments that are controlling the information, or China, and people aren't free in China because they don't get free information. So let's invade. So you can't send American aircraft into Russia or China to free the Russian or Chinese people. The Russian and Chinese people would actually have a fit, and they demand that their governments defend themselves from the invading Americans. So the good ETs just can't invade. The good ETs really have only one option. They have to trigger a revolution from below. So the bad ETs basically have all the leadership in their pockets. The political leadership, the military, the major corporate leadership. But the good ETs have the public in their pocket. The good ETs have been, for example, they have been seeding information into the television and movie realms for a long time. What they do is they feed information into writers' minds when they're sleeping, and then they wake up in the morning and they say, wow, that's a great idea. I think I'm going to have a new show. And so you get Star Trek, you get Star Wars, you get the Matrix movies, you get a whole bunch of stuff coming out on TV and movies, and you get used to the idea of stuff that's out there in the galaxy. So the people are sort of ready for it. And had the good ETs not done that, people would that we would be back in the Stone Ages. On the other hand, though, the governments are controlled by the bad ETs. So that's where we are right now. And the disclosure process is slowly moving forward, but it is at least moving forward, largely because of stuff that we at Farsight are doing and some others. But, if you look at the stuff that the whistleblowers have been talking about, like David Grush who was one of the major whistleblowers to talk over the summer in congressional hearings that were public. People are always focusing on, with David Grush, are we alone in the universe? Are the ETs real? Which is so stupid. They're obviously real. No one's asking the important questions, which is, what are the ETs doing? So if you look at people like Stephen Greer, they're talking about the ETs are just all good. And that's not true. The ETs are not all good. And the ones that are involved, and if he's complaining about the governments, the U.S. government and other governments sort of hiding the information from the people, well, why do you think they're hiding the information from the people? The ETs themselves have written agreements to keep this information secret in exchange for some tech help.
But if so much of this is happening beyond the limits of human perception, then why would any interaction between ETs, whatever their motivation, whatever their intent towards life on Earth, why could that not occur beyond the limits of our perception? Why would it have to use your scenario, why would it have to involve a manifest, visible invasion from off world if what's already happening is we're mostly not aware of?
Well, this planet is being operated as a prison planet by the bad ETs. They consider it their territory. If the good ETs come in and try to break it up, there'll be a war, a shooting war. And the human population will be rattled and probably think the good ETs are the bad ETs and the whole thing. And the bad ETs wouldn't mind at all blowing up the entire planet, because it would teach the rest of the galaxy a lesson. You mess with our stuff and we'll destroy the whole thing. So the good ETs are sort of walking on eggs. There's only so much they can actually do. And there are agreements between the good ETs and the bad ETs not to invade each other's turf. So the good ETs just can't come in. Now, we have had a lot of contact. I have been open about this year. I've always been quiet. I've been secret about it from the very beginning, because I didn't want to get people distracted on this. But this year, we found out that the bad ETs were going to come up with a story that the stuff we're doing at Farsight is actually like an alien invasion to pollute stuff. And so we decided that we had to come out and be open about the contact that we've actually had with the good ETs. So we have had and continue to have regular contact with the good ETs. That they were talking physical contact, and I have been on the ships, for example, that type of thing. And we're being open about that. And we're showing people how to take video recordings of the ships themselves, so that they can, because Greg, you can introduce yourself to people only once. And if your opponents introduce you to people, then you've got to correct everything and it becomes a mess. So I have a video out on YouTube called My Own Background with Extraterrestrials. That's something we've sort of had to be open about now. That we've gotten a lot of help from the good ETs, both in terms of remote viewing procedures. They really helped. The original remote viewing procedures that the U.S. military developed were clunky, to be honest. They weren't structured enough to get the kind of information that we needed to get. I mean, they were good, they worked, but they were clunky. So we had to refine the procedures a lot to get the kinds of information that we wanted. And they're genius, the procedures, but we didn't invent everything. we were given information. We were told what to do, and a lot of these things and the procedures were. I mean, we would come up with designs, and they'd tell us, "Well, try this, try that." And we change things and tweak it, until we finally got procedures that were working really great. So we have had a lot of contact, and we're trying now to be open with everybody about that. And then when people say things that are crazy, like what you just said about what Stephen Greer is saying about all the ETs are good, we have all of our projects that we've done that we spent decades developing. That's a complete revision of human history. Nothing that you get in school is correct with regard to human history. And it shows that the ETs have been extremely abusive over thousands of years. And the fact that they're desperately trying to hide themselves, which we can prove by teaching you or anybody how to take your own video recordings, you can see clear as day they're trying to hide themselves. So it's not that you have to believe somebody else. You don't have to believe anybody. Just get the camera, follow the instructions, and you see for yourself. So it's really clear that it's a very complicated mess out there. And it's just like Earth. It's just like us humans. As above, so below. We have good countries, bad countries. We've got people that are fascist. We've got people authoritarian, and we've got fairly open societies as well. We've got the whole mix. But our more open societies, for example, in Western Europe, Britain, Western Europe, so on like that, we can't invade the less open societies. We don't go in with troops. Well, that's the exact same thing with the ETs. If they have a planet that they're sort of controlling because they've locked in the leadership, the good ETs are looking for an option to get a revolution from below. Now, what we'd like to do in authoritarian governments that we want to have better relationships with is for the people to rise up and demand change. So the United States would like the Chinese people to rise up and demand a more democratic form of government, a more open form of government, greater communication, less censorship on the internet, so on like that. We would like the same thing with Russia. But we can't achieve those results by invading Russia or China, but we can be supportive of efforts to open up lines of communication from within those countries so that the information percolates out by themselves. And that's exactly what the good ETs have been doing. But now it's up to us to sort of push that agenda along so that we have a disclosure movement that is faster. But I've seen exactly the people you're talking about. I've seen those people on sort of major news outlets, and I'm always saying, well, that tells you something. So
if we think about capital D disclosure, which I would characterize as coming from a top-down government, military, secret service, whatever, but an establishment thing. People decrying the lack of this. Evidence being covered up. Everything from Roswell onwards, and on the other hand, you're talking about making the videos as photographic techniques, and this would, how can I put it, expedite disclosure as people take this power into their own hands. But equally, flipping back to it as a top-down process, we talked about government being enthralled to negative influences. But yet, and all there has been talk. You spoke of congressional hearings and whatnot. There has been pressure at government levels. Well, allegedly, that's what we've been told. But why would we expect a government governments enthralled to these negative influences to come forward with anything positive or useful or constructive or even true with regard to ETs?
Well, that's exactly right. If they do have, and they do have written agreements with certain extraterrestrials, and those agreements allow the extraterrestrials to do experiments. The word experiment is a buzzword that is used to cover up human trafficking. They're not doing experiments, they're kidnapping people.
That concludes part 1 of our interview. Part 2 will be available soon in the subscribers area at legalizefreedom.com.
legalizefreedom.com